we'll move on to our busts, or we're calling them busts. The title will say busts, but it's probably not. It's probably a bit harsh to say that. Let's just say that these are players that we think are getting overdrafted or overhyped based on where they're going in mocks and big boards and things like that. And to kick us off, I'll throw it over to you, Callum. Who's your first overvalued / bust player?
Look, we're just talking about it. Let's go back to Kai Jones. Let's delve back into it. If you didn't check out the who we thought were our guys, go check it out. But Kai Jones was one of Mitch's picks for someone who definitely could have some pretty big potential. Look, I do see it's there. I also see the bust potential. And thank you for the disclaimer. These kids are young. Like I want all of them to prove me young, but sometimes there's some signs. There's busts in every draft. It's really hard to pick him. There's a lot of GMs who do a terrible job at this every year. And I can see Kai Jones. He reminds me a little bit of Thon Maker with his measurements and his mobility. And I'm not too sure if obviously Thon Maker was a bust at this point. He's gone out. I've seen him play on the Australian team, those mighty boomers. So
look, I've heard the Thon Maker comparison. I think that's a little unfair to Kai. I think Kai is a much better lateral and like speed athlete. Obviously, Thon had like the shooting touch and the ball handling ability, but I think the athleticism of Kai is on another level to Thon in terms of lateral side to side movement and agility point of view. Would you agree, or do you sort of see them similar?
They just kind of reminded me a bit. I would say Kai does look like a better athlete. And as you said, he did run track. The form's probably a bit better. So he's got that working for him. But he's still a bit older, once again, being 20 years old. As you said, his basketball age is probably a bit younger, given he started a bit young. So, but that being said, when you start young, usually you are a bit limited. You got someone like Luka Doncic, who was, I feel like, had the ball in his hand when he was probably 2 years old. That's why he is what he is.
You can go either way with that. You can go either way. Yeah.
And that's another, on the bus spectrum, that's probably another, thing that's pondering over the back of my mind.
Yeah.
Of this definitely a negative and could end up being a bit of a shitty situation.
Yeah. And I don't think, with him being a my guy, and I do have him ranked quite high. I've got him 8th on my big board. That's
over Sengun.
Yeah, over Sengun. I like him a bit better than Sengun. I like his play style a little bit better. I'm not buying the back to the basket big man. I want a big man who can run the floor, who can catch lobs, who can be a vertical spacer, play good defense. I can see some switchability in him, which is just so important, I think, in today's NBA, to be able to guard your Giannis's and your big guys, but also to be able to switch out when you get those pick and roll switches. So I do see that ability here to him, and I don't see that with Sengun, which is really the defining factor for me. I think their 3-point shot for both of them is pretty similar, and Kai is just a little bit bigger, a bit faster. So I like him better, especially for like a team like Charlotte. Him running up and down with the LaMelo Ball. If I'm Charlotte and if he's there, I'm 100% taking him, because I think he's just if it's a perfect need for what that team needs. But if I'm like Oklahoma City Thunder, Kai Jones is not really what I'm after, because I want star power, I want offense, I want players to build around, and I think he's more of a complementary finishing off piece. A bit like what I was talking about in the previous video in Jaden Springer. So, but as a center, I do like his upside for that position.
Yeah, I think I'd love to see him and LaMelo Ball, just because he'd run the court and there'd be a lot of alley-oop plays between the two. So that definitely could happen. I think that would be a good fit, and that probably would make sure he does reach his potential. But I just wouldn't expect anything too special from him, especially in the first year.
Where do you have him ranked? Where's he on your board?
Kai Jones, I didn't even have him in my lottery.
Yeah. So he's back in the sort of late teens, 20s for you?
It'd be late teens. It'd be teens. It'd definitely be teens, but I'm not too sure. Like, I wouldn't put him at a top 10 prospect. I can see the upside. I can see it, but I can also see that there's a lot of negatives on the other hand. So I think he's a bit of a flip the coin player, and it's not someone, especially in such a deep draft. I would find it hard to spin the dice on someone who could potentially only be like a good role player, as opposed to some of these other guys out there.
Yeah. No, I get that. I don't think that, like, I know this is a deep draft, but there's not too many big guys that I like. There's Sengun and then there's Kai Jones. outside of that, I like JT Thor, who we mentioned in our mock draft last podcast. But outside of that, there's a few other players that are like ifs and maybes. But outside of that, there's not many players that I really love. So if you are in need of a big man, I do like Kai Jones. Obviously, you're a bit hesitant. Let's talk about bust number 2. Now, this one is probably gaining a bit of momentum. If I had said this maybe a few weeks ago, I would have got a bigger reaction, I think. But Jonathan Kuminga is my bust here, and for the whole draft season, up until maybe like this last week, he's been the consensus number 5 pick, and for the life of me, I just can't understand why. I mean, I don't know. I mean, on our last podcast when we talked about our mock lottery, I went through and I talked about all these players that come through with potential, and they talk about, they've got the body. He's 6'8", he's got a 7-foot wingspan, he's athletic, he was a high prospect coming out of high school. But there needs to be more for me to be someone who gets drafted inside the top 10. You need to have. He's a horrible shooter. His decision making is not there. His defense is still in like a potential phase. He hasn't shown an ability to be a lockdown defender. Yes, he's got the physical tools, but he hasn't shown it yet. And defense is a lot more than just being big and long and quick. You do have to have some instincts. So there's a lot of ifs there. I'm totally comfortable with taking him outside the top 10. I think that if you're outside the top 10, you can take some swings and those players down there, there's question marks with them anyway. And his upside is obviously higher than a lot of those players. But for me, he is a tier below players like Josh Giddey, players like Jalen Johnson, Kai Jones, Jaden Springer, 2 tiers below Scotty Barnes and Moses Moody, and is more around. I would compare him similarly to like a Sengun, sort of the back end of the lottery, personally. What's your thoughts on Kuminga?
Yeah, I'm kind of still sliding him again. Like, I was pretty sold on him for the number 5 pick, like everyone else was, say, a month ago. But
yeah,
there's definitely red flags there. He is young though, and that's why you're going for him. He's young. He's got the tools. Hopefully he can put it together. He still put up 16 points a game. It was just very inefficient. And yes, his decision making has a bit of work to go. So I definitely, I think out of everyone in the draft, especially considering so many mocks have him, pretty much, he's pretty high. He's kind of like mid, 5, 6, 7. So in terms of a bust, he screams at me right now.
Yeah. I think in that top 10, I'm the most uncertain with him out of all the picks. Depending on some of these other picks, if they do end up in the top 10, I just think that he, in every single mock, every single big board I see, he's in there. Although I have seen some players and some big boards on Twitter putting him more in sort of some even outside the lottery. I think he's a lottery pick. I'd be taking a swing inside the lottery, but it's outside the top 10 for me. Where's he ranked in yours at the moment?
He'd probably be in the top 10. I'd need to move it around a bit, but he'd be late. He'd be 9, 8, 9, 10 is probably.
Yeah.
I still think he's got the defensive tools. Like, he's got the Kawhi Leonard upside, and that's why he's going so high in this draft.
That's right. But like we discussed in our previous mock draft, all those players, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Giannis, Jimmy Butler, all those players that ended up being non-shooting athletic wings that turned into perennial all-stars, they went outside the top 10. The only exception was Jaylen Brown, who was a similar sort of style player, who was the 3rd overall pick, obviously. But there's been a lot of busts inside the top 10 trying to find those kind of players. So I can just see the writing on the wall for Kuminga being that. Again, hopefully he proves me wrong. Let's move on to the next bust. Cal, who have you got?
My next bust is Ziaire Williams. I'm not completely sold on him. I just don't like his game. Can I just say that? Is that too blunt?
I think that's fair. I mean, his game wasn't very good in college. I think we can all agree with that.
He came out of high school as like one of the top prospects. He's got all the tools. He's one of those guys he's going to get drafted really high because he is 6'9" and he's long and he is mobile. But sometimes they just don't have it. He's got all the tools. He's almost 20 years old now. He's about 19 and whatever, but 10 points a game is what he put up on 37% shooting.
Yeah. It's not good.
That's terrible. That's shocking. 29% from three. Like all those percentages are terrible. I think he's too skinny to really be a defender at this point as well. Defensively, I guess there is some upside given his height and mobility, but even then he's just such a slender frame. And there's so many red flags here. And I feel like at this point, he's only going so high just because of his height and because of his length. And he's shown some glimpses, but I think the bad outweighs the good so much here that there's busters screaming all over him.
Yeah, I think he's one of those funny ones. I think he's either going to be a bust and we won't see him after a few years, or I think he could turn into an all-star. Like, I think he's going to be one or the other. I mean, he's either going to develop into a great player or he's going to be a terrible player. That's my personal point of view. I kind of see him similarly to how I see Kuminga, maybe just a little bit less convinced because of the frame. And obviously, he didn't put up as many points as Kuminga did. I think, is Kuminga a bit younger as well?
Yeah, Kuminga's 18, and they're about a year apart.
Yeah, so about a year apart. So, and that's why obviously he's probably got, for me, about 8 to 10 spots on a Ziaire Williams. I don't mind if you're the OKC Thunder or the Houston Rockets and you take a swing at him. You hope for the best. But if you're a team not like that, then I probably wouldn't bother in the first round. Would you agree with that kind of evaluation of him?
I think he'd have to be a very, very late first rounder. Like, I'm talking high 20s, and it'd be for a team pretty desperate just for the upside potential. But
yeah.
And look, yes, there is some upside there given the measurements, given his physical traits. But I just think there's so much that yells me for bust for this guy.
Yeah, it's always those fluid moving, lanky, long wing players that are tempting if they hit, because when they hit, they can be so good. They can be, but there's reaches every year that don't work out in looking for that. So.
Yeah, I'd say his absolute ceiling and in a player, if everything went completely well for him, would be, I think he's got a bit of a Brandon Ingram in him.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting comparison. Yeah, I get obviously the physical comparison.
He was an all-star, and I guess he's still young. He's got years to go, but so I just don't think he's going to get to that level personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was a period that I was down on Brandon Ingram, and obviously he won that most improved player of the year award couple seasons ago. So, I like that comparison actually. I haven't quite put those two together, but I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. All right, let's move on to my next bust, and it is a player who I feel very strongly about, and I am sick of seeing his name inside the top 10, and it is Davion Mitchell. Why are we drafting how old is he?
22.9 years old.
22-year-old, 6'1" point guard inside the top 10. Why are we doing this? Just because the Warriors are in a win now mode? No. Stop it. Please stop it. He's fine. He's okay. But there's so many other good players in this draft at a younger age that you can do so much better. Just because he's an older player doesn't mean you put him on the Warriors. And at pick 7, that just makes no sense to me. I've got him ranked 20 and beyond on my big board. I just think there's so many other players I'd rather take a swing on. I get he's got a cool nickname, Off Night. It makes it sound really cool, but it's just, I don't see it. He's 6 foot tall. He's got small hands. He's the shooting. There's concerns. The free throw shooting doesn't give me any confidence for his 3-point shooting. He's only had a 1-year sample size of being a 40+% 3-point shooter. I'll give it. He plays good defense. Yes. But for me, that's not enough. That's not enough to get you on this list. And on the NBA, to be a 6'1" great defender, you'd have to be truly great at defense to make a big impact on that side of the floor. Otherwise, you're just going to get outsized. The length is just going to dominate you, and you're not going to be able to do much against those premier players in the NBA. So maybe a bit harsh, but I'm just out on Davion Mitchell, and I'm sick of seeing him in the top 10. What are your thoughts? Do you disagree?
I'll ask you one quick question. Does he not remind you at all of Marcus Smart? You're a Celtics fan.
No,
You don't see it in him.
Don't give me that Marcus Smart comparison, because Marcus Smart is way bigger, way longer, has better. I'm more convinced with Marcus Smart's shot, and yeah. So just that size difference. If he was 6'4", I'd be much more inclined to believe it, because then he'd have a bit more length. He could guard ones and twos, but Davion Mitchell can't guard twos. I don't think. Not with that length, not with that height. He's obviously not a scorer. 14 points a game. You know, he's been in college for 4 years now, and he can only score 14 points a game. I mean, come on. I'm just not sold. I'm not sold, Callum. I know he got a bump. He won the championship. I think that's where it's come from. Winning the NCAA tournament. That's got to be a big reason. But yeah, I'm not sold. Is that your comparison?
He's a winner. That's what I say. The man's a winner. I like Davion Mitchell. The reason he's so high is because he was the third best point guard, and I don't hate the pick if he does go in the lottery. I think he is a lottery pick. I like his game. The comparison for him definitely is more of a Patrick Beverley, because he is such.
That's your comp.
Good defender.
That's who I'm. He's Patrick Beverley to me, and that's fine. You know, Patrick Beverley is a fine player. He's a good defender, but are you taking him in the lottery? I don't know.
Well, this is the thing. He's Patrick Beverley, but he does have a bit of an offensive game. Yes, his 3-point shooting was great this season. Could be an anomaly. It could be, an up year in a reduced COVID-ridden season. That's totally potential. Definitely bust potential there.
Yeah.
But he's got a good driving game. The man's quick. The man's got some speed, like bit of a Ty Lawson, bit of a, and when you have that defense, imagine if Ty Lawson could play defense. He'd be he was almost an all-star anyway. So
I don't know if he's as quick as Ty Lawson, but I think Ty Lawson played in a different NBA as well. But
that is true. But Davion Mitchell, I think I'm trying to say his offensive potential is better than someone like a Patrick Beverley. And when you bring that defense on a nightly basis, like Pep does, while also not being limited, I think that's a great starting point guard for a lot of different players, especially when so many of the teams these days have your point forwards. You could put him next to, or even even Donovan Mitchell, someone who's like a guard who needs the ball in his hand. You put him next to a Steph Curry. You put him next to, I don't know if Giddey's going to be the best point guard of the future. You put him next to a LaMelo Ball. Yeah. Like, he can fit around so many players because you need him to guard the point guard on the other side, which he can do. I think he's proven that he can do that. And I like his game. I'm not a hater like you are, but I can see some bust potential. I will say that, but mainly for the 3-point shooting. But he's still going to be a specialist.
Yeah. Look, I'm not a hater. I just think he's getting ranked way too high. Like, if I'm the Knicks or if I'm Atlanta, in the 19, 20, 21, then I'm looking at him. I like, he would be perfect on the Knicks. Like, he would be great. He would be a good defender. He would work well with the Julius Randle. He could hit an open three. And perfect. They win now. They're trying to push into the playoffs. Great. Because there's less talent on the board at that point. But when you're at pick 7, even pick 14, you've got to try and go for players who are higher talented. Like, because if you look back into the draft of years past, you're going to say, why the fuck do we draft Davion Mitchell when we had, and I'm not saying Josh Giddey's going to be like this, but Josh Giddey turns into a LaMelo Ball, or maybe that does happen. Like, it's just it's just, maybe it's a philosophy thing, but I just think that you can get that kind of player later in the draft, in my point of view.
I think we drafted him perfectly in our mock draft, because I picked him up at the 10th pick, which I think is a good spot for him. Goes to New Orleans. He's in the lottery, right? I think he belongs in the lottery. And just because, look, you've got Point Zion. You have Point Zion. And then you got Davion to lock up the guard on the other team, while he can also play a bit of a drive game. Zion hitting the screen, he's quick. I can see that being a good match together. So, yeah,
I don't know. I just don't think that team's ever winning a championship if that's the player you're picking there. I think you're just limiting your ceiling personally, but that's my point of view, and that's why he's my bust. That's why we have these conversations. I guarantee he's going to go higher than I think he should on the draft night. Was it I think it was Jay Billis had him as the 5th best prospect in this draft, which I just think is absolutely crazy. But anyway,
we'll good bust comparison for him would be Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn came out a little bit later. 3 years. He
That's
won.
actually an excellent comparison.
He won the defensive player, All-American defense, multiple years. Chris Dunn he was drafted. He was the 5th pick. He was the centerpiece for the Jimmy Butler trade. Chris Dunn. So there's your bust side.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for making my argument. All right, we got one more bust each. Let's fire through these next two. Who's your last bust here, Cal?
All right, my next bust is it's got to be Corey Kispert, and the reason it's Corey Kispert is because yes, he's a good role player. He can hit a 3-point shot, but that's all he is. I don't want to see him go to the Golden State with the 7th pick like I've seen some drafts have.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that. He shouldn't be going that high. He's a very limited ceiling. I guess the best thing he could become would be, I don't even know. Like I just see him as Dougie McDermott. That's kind of where I see him. And Dougie McDermott's a bench guy who can come up and hit a 3, bit of a heat, spark plug, heat check.
Yeah.
I don't think I think he should be picked more in the 20s personally.
Yeah. I think he's a 20s kind of player too. I agree with you here. He's an interesting one because I think obviously he only suits certain teams. I don't think Oklahoma City's drafting Corey Kispert. I don't think, someone like Houston is drafting Corey Kispert. But, do the Warriors pick him up at 14? I would rather the Warriors pick Kispert at 14 than Davion Mitchell, personally. Now, I think that he is obviously a lot less dynamic a player than Davion Mitchell, but he has a role. He's a great shooter, and that has value in the league. Now, how much do you want out of your draft pick? Do you want to swing for upside? That's the question. I am of the belief that you want it. This is a deep draft class. You've got a lot of players here who can shoot the 3. You've got a Trey Murphy later in the draft who's going to 20s, who's 6'9", has a long wingspan, plays good defense, who you can get 10 spots after Corey Kispert. So for that reason, I do agree that Corey Kispert is I don't want to say bust because I don't think he can bust, but he's going way too high for what he brings because he is going to bring what he's going to bring. He's safe. So in that way, he's not a bust, but he's also just not worth a top 14 pick, personally. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. His upside is very limited. And I guess in the perfect world, maybe Duncan Robinson would be his comparison as a knockdown 3-point
I think he's
shooter.
probably a little bit better of a defender than a Duncan Robinson, slightly. So I think he's got a bit more upside than that. I'm trying to think of maybe he's Danny Green. I think maybe that kind of a level. Probably not even as good a defender as Danny Green, but Danny Green light. And how exciting is that? Not very.
Yeah, well, Danny Green was look. I don't think Corey Kispert has anywhere near the defensive upside. I think Danny Green made some more defensive teams.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I think he's got some. I don't think he's like your stereotypical Kyle Korver where he's got 0 defense. He's got a little bit of defense. I know he's a white guy and he shoots 3s, and that's what we defer to. But he's got a little bit of defense.
He's a very, very, very poor man's Klay Thompson. How about that? That's probably a compliment to him.
Emphasis on the very,
very poor man's Klay Thompson.
Yeah. All right. Last one to close it out for this podcast today, Cal, and our bus show. Probably, I would say this one's probably the most controversial one we've got tonight. Maybe Davion Mitchell might be, but for me, it's James Bouknight. Now, he is, again, another person who I'm seeing in a lot of top 10s. I'm seeing the Warriors get him at pick 7. It seems to be this damn Warriors pick. People don't know what to do with the Warriors pick. Maybe some people are putting him on, the Orlando Magic. And the argument here is that, well, he's a bucket getter. He's just going to get you buckets, which, yes, he scored 19 points a game. But to me, if you're a bucket getter in the NBA, you've got to be able to shoot 3s. And that is not something that I'm convinced James Bouknight can do. And if he can't hit 3s and he can't facilitate and pass and he's not a plus defender, well, then what are you? Do you know what I mean? So his value really hinges on that ability to shoot 3s. And I'm just not convinced. I'm not convinced enough to take him in the lottery. To me, he's, again, towards the back end of the teens, early 20s, for me personally. What's your thoughts on James Bouknight?
I like Bouknight. He's a bucket. He's a bucket. I can honestly see Golden State getting him because they need a scorer. I can absolutely see them getting Bouknight, and he'll be like a scorer off the bench. I think his prowess offensively will translate to the NBA. He's crafty. He can get to the rim. He's a great finisher at the rim. Yes, he needs to come a long way in 3-point shooting. But look, that being said, maybe this he shot like 35% the season before. And you could argue that's a bigger sample size just because they actually played the full 28 games. This reduced season he only played 15 games, and we're saying he's shooting 29%. I'd give him benefit of the doubt a bit. Apparently he's been killing the workouts and he has been knocking them all down.
Apparently.
Yeah, apparently. I could see him. I think best case scenario for him, best case would be a Jamal Murray. I can see that for him in some world, but I do admit like, there is bust potential. Yeah. But yeah, you go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I can see that. I can see the upside. You know, I have him higher than a Davion Mitchell. I think he's got a higher upside than a player like that. The downside is if he doesn't get the shot, then to me, there's no point him being on an NBA roster. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what he's there for. He's there to score. He's not there to play defense. He's not there to facilitate. He's got good physical, so he's got good length and wingspan. He's got a decent height at 6'5". So he's got that on his side, which I do like. I just like other players. I like other players better than him at that point. Like I'd rather take a Jaden Springer or a Jalen Johnson or someone like that. You know, I see him similarly, maybe a little bit ahead of like a Ziaire Williams. Like there's a lot of potential you're hoping for. You're hoping for things to go right. You're hoping for things to improve. He's by no means a finished product. And at age 20, I would rather him be a little bit further along in his production than where I see him at the moment. But yeah, that's our bus show. Let us know if you hated some of the picks. I'm sure you know, people will disagree with me out there, but that's fine. This is just my opinion. Obviously, Cal, you disagree with some of my picks, and I disagree with some of your picks. So this is what all the conversation is about. We're all at this stage guessing until these players get in the NBA and we can finally see. So anything you wanted to touch on before we wrap up the pod here, Cal?
Not really. I'll just say, yeah, comment who you think will be a big bust. Comment who you think will, you know, be the best prospect, because in 5 years from now, Mitch and I will definitely come back to this list, and I'm sure one of us at least will be slapping our heads on the forehead. Someone
will have egg on their face, I'm sure of it, but
exactly.
Time will tell. Time will tell. Again, follow us at Ball Boys NBA on Twitter for everything up to date. If you're a fantasy basketball enthusiast, jump on there when the season starts, and leading up to the season, we'll also be posting a lot of good info there. Subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you next week. Bye.